Well, here we are again for lesson 7 for our tools for emotional healing class. I uploaded the handouts that should be available for anybody to download. We're waiting for a few people to come on, see the people joining us. We talked last week about fear and trauma and so forth. We're going to continue our discussion on fear today. Right. And talk a little bit about courage and also the relationship between fear and addictions and those kind of behaviors. So let me pull up the slides for tonight's lesson, and we'll start showing our presentation. I'm just going to momentarily hide my webcam, and what we're going to do is talk about developing the courage to face one's fears and overcome one's fears. Fear is not, like all emotions, fear is not totally negative. I mean, fear can help protect us from danger. It can motivate us to achieve peak performance, like being nervous about doing something means I'm more likely to want to prepare so I don't be a fool or be like a failure. Having some fear about the harmful effects of doing certain things can help us make wise decisions. When we feel afraid, our senses become heightened. We become more aware and alert. And in fact, fear is actually kind of fun because the reason why people go to amusement parks is to get scared. And we call that excitement. As we're going to talk about tonight, fear and excitement are very, very closely related. Okay, so we talked last week about the fear eliciting a response where it activates the adrenals, and we have cortisol, and we have epinephrine running through our veins. But that happens watching action, adventure, and horror films. That happens engaging in extreme sports such as rock climbing and zip gliding and bungee jumping and riding amusement park rides. So why would we consider the adrenaline rush negative in certain circumstances, and at other times we find it fun? And the answer simply is whether we perceive we're going to be able to handle it or not. There's rational fears. There's fears of doing things that are actually dangerous and actually could kill you. And to be afraid of something that could kill you or cause you serious bodily harm is absolutely perfectly rational and normal. However, most of us, what we're talking about in trying to overcome fear is overcoming irrational fears. Fears where the thing that's causing us to be afraid is actually no threat to our physical life or existence at all. It's not going to damage our body. It's not going to kill us. It has no sorts of things. So, like, for example, the fear of failure, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of rejection, fears of mice, fears of, harmless snakes, fears of bugs, all these things, phobias. These fears actually are not innate. They were created by unresolved trauma. So in other words, when we talked about the trauma vortex last time, they're actually the result of unresolved trauma vortexes, and they don't serve us. They just hijack us, in moments of we don't want it. Now, fear, and this is something that goes way back to when I first started this thing. And I talked about my experience with meeting Christ in the light and how he told me that the tools of darkness were shame, fear, guilt, and blame. These are also tools of control. People use these things, trying to instill fear in people, trying to shame them, make them feel guilty, blame them for things to try to take control of them. They're used by parents, they're used by religions, they're used by governments, they're used by doctors, they're used by lawyers, all kinds of people who want to exercise control. And so fear is often instilled into us by people in authority or whatever in order to endeavor to control us. And that's where a lot of these irrational fears come from. And one of the reasons why this is a very effective weapon is because when we're afraid, remember that whole stress response hijacks temporarily our higher reasoning powers. It shuts down our ability to think and focus clearly. We have a hard time making rational decisions. So when someone who we perceive as having more power or more authority or whatever than we do tells us when we're afraid that they'll make us safe, they'll do something to protect us if we surrender something, such as control of our lives or surrender some of our freedom or liberties or whatever, most people will give into that. They'll buy into that. I guess I'm going to be here really kind of very outspoken and blatant about something, but the day, when 9/11 happened, I immediately felt there was something like really kind of sneaky and suspicious going on with how quickly they quote unquote solved that thing and told us what happened. And because I figured a real investigation into something of that magnitude would take a minimum of 3 to 4 months to really actually nail down. But they were telling us the next day everything. And this was just too convenient. But whether you believe 9/11 was legitimate or not, the fact is that when 9/11 happened and people watched those, images of the Twin Towers and so forth, that instilled a lot of fear into people. And in the middle of that fear, you heard the thing terrorists, 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 terrorists. And immediately after that, the Patriot Act was passed with very little debate, very little consideration, something that actually took away a lot of our freedoms. So our freedoms are at risk. So, give us control and let us take away some of your freedoms and we'll protect you. That was really what happened. And of course, that's when they started mass surveillance and recording all our cell phone conversations and emails and all that sort of thing. I'm just saying that whether a disaster is, deliberate or whether it's, something nobody could have foreseen, often people in power use that as an opportunity to grab more power because people are scared. It's a weapon. Fear is a very, very powerful weapon. And this is when you're not in tune with yourself, when you don't understand your own heart, you don't understand your own emotions, when you haven't learned how to process your own feelings, you're very susceptible to people manipulating you emotionally. So when people are trying to influence you, they're trying to get you to change from the inside out. They're respecting your right to choose, but they're trying to persuade you or influence you that this is the right thing to do. It's very effective in terms of long-term behavioral change. Manipulation and control are attempts to change people's behavior from the outside in. They're not respecting people's rights to choose. They're basically trying to take away people's right to choose. And in the long term, they're not very effective because there's no internal motivation to change. And so when people are using fear, it's part of the tools of manipulation and control. So there's a lot of reactions associated with fear. I mean, being scared or frightened, worried. Worry is a form of projecting fears into the future. We're trying to think ahead of all the bad things that could happen and creating fear about our future. Stress is an ongoing fear reaction to the circumstances of life. Nervous and anxiety are a chronic state of fear. In fact, if you suffer from an anxiety disorder, you're suffering from a chronic state of fear. You've basically got fear that is coming from your unresolved trauma vortexes that is bothering you constantly. Panic is a acute state of terror, paralyzing fear that just literally binds you into inaction. And being timid or shy is a lack of self-confidence or a fear of failure, a fear of being out in front of other people or whatever that inhibits us from being able to do certain things. So there's a lot of ways that fear can express itself in our lives. The thing is that one of the biggest fears we have is looking at what's inside of us, of dealing with our own emotions, of dealing with what's going on inside of us. It's much easier to run away from this. Now, when I have fear, I'm instinctively motivated to want to try to solve or fix whatever the problem is that's causing me fear. But when I perceive myself as helpless to do that and I feel stuck, then that energy of the anxiety that I'm feeling that's making me want to go do something and fix the problem pushes me to want to do something. And that's where all of our addictions and compulsions and strange habits happen, is because we often are using these things to run away, because I can distract myself from my fear. I can distract myself from my inner unhappiness and discomfort and everything by engaging in activities that I'm compulsively using to escape and to try to escape my life. Interesting, last night I watched the movie, I think it's called Click, Adam Sandler, where he gets a universal remote control to control his life. And he starts fast forwarding over parts of his life and basically winds up missing his entire life. Goes back and lives it over again. But in the movie, the guy says, well, you were on autopilot. Well, that's what happens to a lot of us. We are running away from ourselves, so we're on autopilot. We're not really consciously aware. We're just trying to escape. So how do we do that? We eat. We drink substances. We can become addicted to caffeine, alcohol, drugs. Anytime we feel discomfort, we reach for our little, smoking. We reach for our little habit to do that. You also have the psychological addictions, gambling, playing computer games obsessively. They're all ways of running away. And I'm not saying that, I like to play a computer game. I like to watch a movie. I like to, do some things. But when you're compulsively doing it, when you're thoughtlessly doing it, when you're constantly, and like you're overeating, or you shouldn't be doing this thing, like you're playing computer games and it's causing you to not get to bed on time, and you're losing sleep and you're whatever. This kind of obsession is all involved in how we run away from ourselves. It's really trying to dodge our fears. It's trying to hope that if we kind of we'll go distract ourselves for a while, that the problem will solve itself without us having to do anything. And that is all a sign that we need to do, emotional healing work. So the antidote to fear is courage. Okay, so remember, all of this happens from unresolved freeze responses. That is, we get a trauma vortex going because we had a freeze reaction. We never were able to figure out how to deal with what happened to us. So it got buried and buried and buried and buried. And more stuff gets added to it. And the way you have to deal with something that scares you is to do something about it. Instead of trying to run away from it, to face it head on and do your best to do something about it. That's what all of the energy of the stress response is giving you the ability to do, to basically give you all this energy of adrenaline and rush and everything to be able to perform really, really well. And when you're able to force yourself to make a choice, the best rational choice you can, and do something about whatever's causing you fear and anxiety, that's called courage. Courage is not feeling afraid. Courage is the ability to feel the fear and then make a choice to do something and not try to run away from it or escape it. And so I call this the 1, 2, 3 jump. Some years ago, there's a reservoir not too far from where I live that had just been built. It's called Sand Hollow. I still like to go swimming there, but it was a lot funner to go swimming there when it was not filled yet, because there were a whole bunch of like sandstone cliffs that of varying heights that you could jump off of into very deep water. There was one I saw that was about 12 feet high, and I thought, that really looks fun. And I watched people jump off of it, so I climbed up there. And I'll tell you, when you're standing, on top of the thing, looking down, it looks a lot higher than when you're looking up. Maybe that's, I'm adding an additional 6 feet because I'm 6 feet, 4 inches high, but still, nonetheless, your adrenaline starts, and there's this feeling of like fear, like, so what courage is I look at this and I say to myself, I just watched a whole bunch of other people jump off of this rock, probably about 10 of various ages, from kids to grown-ups. Okay. I know how to swim. All right. I'm not going to drown. The water is obviously deep enough because nobody's hurt themselves jumping off of this. So I'm going to jump in spite of the fact that I'm feeling fear. And so I just go 1, 2, 3 and make myself jump, hit the water, came up out of it and went, whoa, that was so fun, and went and did it again. That's what courage is. Courage is the ability to take and talk yourself into action in the face of something that scares you by basically saying, okay, I'm not going to die. There's no rational reason for this. I'm just going to make myself do it. And you did this by tackling little fears first. And then as you get good at tackling little fears, you can tackle bigger fears. And that way you can learn to overcome the fear and anxiety in your life by learning to take action in the face of your fear. And that actually creates a very exciting life. Years ago, basically decided this thing. I refused to live my life in fear. It actually happened because of an experience I had where I was always the person. My mother raised me in an environment of extreme fear. I mean, my mom was afraid of everything. She suffered from extremely high anxiety for her whole life until I actually started helping her a little bit with it towards the end of her life. But my mom believed that one mistake could ruin your entire life. That is, you screwed up on one thing, your whole life would be ruined from that point on. And so it made me very afraid to make decisions, very afraid to try things, and so forth. So I was always very careful, always playing everything by the rules, always trying to do everything the right way. And then a whole bunch of bad things happened to me. And it was like, here I am, always trying to do the right thing, and boom, all these bad things have happened to me. What did I do wrong? And I was thinking about this, and I had kind of like this, this spiritual experience. I imagined myself dying and going to God, and I said, all my life I tried to do what other people told me was right. And I just, in my mind, heard God say, well, you never did what I put into your heart to do. You never trusted yourself. And I went, and then I thought about that, and I thought, well, what if I make a mistake? And I thought, well, if I make a mistake, I'll learn from my mistake and I'll correct it and try something different. And so I actually, after I thought about this for a while, I went back into that same kind of meditative state and imagined myself going before God. And he said, I'm telling him, I always tried to do what I believed in my heart was right. I made mistakes, but I did my best to fix them. And I had this feeling like, you got it. And so I started to adopt this motto: I refuse to live my life in fear. I decided I was going to start being bold enough to make decisions, even though it may went against the grain of other people. And that's really been a guiding thing in my life. That happened to me about when I was, I think, 23. And I just started to just not be afraid to try new things. I'm not very physically athletic, but I still have done some very interesting things. But I do the same thing I told you about in the 1, 2, 3 jump. Just is this going to kill me? Am I okay? Going to be okay? Whatever. And so I've just basically said I refuse to let my fear control my life. I don't want to live my life worrying about everything. I mean, not that I'm immune to worry, and not that things don't sometimes get me nervous or anxious, but I quickly try to pull myself out of it. And I basically said, okay, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? I'm not going to let the fear paralyze me. I don't want to run away from it. And so I've taken that as a challenge kind of my whole life. And the thing is like I said, fear or stress and excitement are the same physiological response. The difference is that in excitement, we perceive that the risk has been minimized. That's we're going to survive it. So when you have the courage to take action in the face of fear, deciding I can survive this, the fear actually turns into excitement. And so we can choose whether to live a fearful, anxious life or choose to live an exciting life. And how we do that depends on how we choose to approach dealing with the things that make us afraid. Having the faith. So this is the thing that really kind of helps understand this. See, down here, this is the line represents your personal ability and skill, how much skill you have. And this is the difficulty of the challenge. So when we're faced with something that's really difficult, that is beyond our abilities and skill, we feel stressed, all right? When we're faced with tasks that aren't very difficult at all, that are below our abilities and skill, we feel bored. When we're always choosing to do things that we already know how to do, but don't really challenge us that much, we're riding in our comfort zone. When we choose to do things that are a little bit difficult and outside of our comfort zone, that's where the excitement is. I don't want to try to do something that I haven't, developed enough ability and skill to tackle, but I do want to constantly be pushing the boundaries a little bit to have an exciting life. And this means crossing over that line into fear. Here's another way of looking at this. There's a balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So when you've got a certain amount of challenge, but it's not an overwhelming challenge, then you're very focused, you're energized, and you feel challenged, okay? When the challenge starts to go beyond what you feel you can handle, you feel first overwhelmed, then you feel stressed, and then eventually that can lead to feeling exhausted and burnt out. But if nothing were challenging you, if everything in life was just drifting along, you move from being energized and excited to starting to be bored. And if you stay in the thing of being bored, you're going to eventually become apathetic and eventually depressed. So in other words, there's a sweet spot where we're constantly like challenging ourselves and rising above our fears. And like I said, the biggest fear is to learn to face yourself. I've often told people, the one person you will never be able to run away from is you. You can try. You can drown yourself in alcohol or go bury yourself in computer games or whatever. But when you get done, you're still there, and so you are the one person that you're going to have to live with for the rest of your existence, not just the rest of your life, but the rest of eternity. Okay, so you might as well get to know yourself and face what's inside of you and work through it. Even though it's painful, a little bit difficult, a little bit stressful, tackling it and challenging it changes you from a life of feeling stressed and anxious or bored or anything like that into a life that's genuinely interesting and exciting and fruitful. So I want to tell just this little story with these pictures just as an example of doing a challenge. Now, this set of pictures I took the first time I went to Angel's Landing. Now, the picture on the left is the trail to Angel's Landing, and the mountain straight in front of the trail is Angel's Landing. Now, that mountain is actually only about 30 or 40 feet wide at the top, and there's just kind of level thing, but it's basically just sitting up there in the clouds. And this is higher up on the trail, and you see this little ridge right here. I hope you can see my pointer, but this little ridge right here, maybe I could draw on this like that. Anyway, that part is the same thing as this. And you can see it's just a narrow little spine that goes up. So I decided one year I was going to challenge. Well, here's an actually better picture of it. You can see this little ridge that's straight ahead that just goes up to the top of the mountain. And it's just very narrow. I mean, in certain places, it's only 5 or 10 feet wide. And there's cliffs on either side of it. And so I decided a few years back on the 4th of July, I was going to tackle Angel's Landing. And I knew I wanted to get up there before it got too hot, before it got too crowded. So I basically got up really early in the morning. I told my boys who were with me, I said, if you want to go with me, you got to wake up. They woke up, and we were up there probably about 7 o'clock in the morning to start up this trail. This is actually taken on another occasion when I went up further looking at the trail. And this is the first part of the trail where you come up these switchbacks that are cut into the side of the cliff. That's the easy part of the trail. And then you go up here, and here's the sign warning you that people have died from falling off this cliff. And you can see this is the trail. The trail just goes right up the ridge of that spine. And here's an example of what the trail looks like. That little chain is something to hold on to, and there are cliffs on both sides. So basically, it's scary. I mean, standing on the edge of 1,000-foot straight drop off gets the adrenaline going. And anyway, but I'd always wanted to do this, and we went up there and did this. Now, sometime back, I was working with someone who doing some emotional healing work. I'd gone off and on for years, and she was staying at my house for a couple of weeks, getting some work done. And she said, I want to tackle my fears. I want to go to Angel's Landing. So she actually went and made it to the top. It was really, really amazing. It was a fun experience. But this is what I mean. What you have said to myself as I did this, okay, is there are hundreds and hundreds of people who hike this every day. Okay, so I can do it too. Even though it's a little scary. This is one of the scariest parts of the trail, because you can see there's just a very, very narrow little spot where you're basically got the cliffs on both sides. And here I am, just having crossed over that very, very narrow little spot. And you can see the cliffs going down both sides. And here I am on the trail, standing on the edge of the cliff. And this is the scariest picture of all. My boys actually someone told them how to do this. They laid back on the rock. So they were laying flat on the rock, and they let their legs hang over the edge. And then they held the camera out in front of them like this and took the picture of their legs dangling over the top. But that's the road down there. And that's where you are. And that's where I am right here on the very top of that. So forth. And it was so thrilling to do this. I mean, it was really, really a thrilling experience. I've done it twice now. Yeah, and it's scary. But the fact is that as you learn to, face your fears, challenge yourself, it leads to self-confidence. You have the ability to overcome your fears. Again, it's courage. Courage is not that you don't feel fear. Courage is the fact that you're able to push through the fear and make yourself do what you know you need to do, and take action in the face of your fear. That's how you overcome fear. By the way, this is us, on the way back down from the trail. You can see how much fun we all had with this. So this is kind of exercise I want to talk about for applying this. What you want to do is find a little time to be alone and think about your greatest fear or some of your greatest fears. Maybe make a list of things you're afraid of. Are you afraid of failure? Are you afraid of public speaking? Are you afraid of water? Are you afraid of heights? Are you afraid of bugs? Are you afraid of, I don't know, whatever you're afraid of, okay? You afraid of dying? Are you afraid of, poverty? Whatever. Make a list of that and think about, wouldn't it be wonderful to conquer that fear? To conquer your fear of rejection, to conquer your fear of bad things that might happen in the future. Anyway, you write those fears down. Write down, pick one in particular. But, you can list a whole bunch, but then pick one, okay? And ask yourself, what would be the solution to the fear? What would be something I could do, some action I could take where I could confront this fear, where I could do something about this fear? And write down the solution about a dozen times. I'm afraid of failure. Okay, I could have the courage to try something and fail and keep trying until I succeeded. In other words, to stick with it till I succeed. But you pick that out and you think about this, all right? Because I'm telling you this because I have actually, when I've realized that I have a fear of something, I have actually deliberately, in many cases, gone and done the thing I was afraid of. I remember some time back I was single, and I was listening to some dating gurus, and they were talking about approach anxiety, about how guys are really afraid sometimes to just go up to a woman and say hi or start a conversation with them because like they're really, really scared of that. And it's a big fear for a lot of men. And I thought, okay, I'm going to conquer this. So I started just saying hi to people, hi to women, I started practicing striking up conversations. It was scary, but I made myself do it. I've done this with lots and lots of things. Okay. So you take the fear. Remember, we're talking about irrational fears. We're talking about fears of things that doing them is not going to kill you. Okay. Or there are safe ways of doing it because other people are able to do it because they've acquired whatever skills or tools or whatever to know how to navigate those things. They're able to do it. So if somebody else can do it, then it's very likely you could, I'm afraid of being rejected. Maybe you were abused. I'm afraid of being abused again. Okay. You write down the solution. I know that if I keep trying, I will eventually succeed. That's for fear of failure. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm strong enough to handle rejection and I have the courage to risk being vulnerable, to put myself out there like I did. Okay. I'm afraid of being abused again. I won't allow myself to be abused again. If someone tries to abuse me, I'll fight back. I'll pull their hair. I'll kick them. I'll go down punching and screaming and kicking. Okay. You start thinking through in your mind because fear is largely a mind game. Anger is a gut issue. The grief is a heart issue, but fear is a mind issue. Fear is learning to pull yourself back into your rational mind and force yourself to think through possible solutions and then have the courage to take action on those solutions, so forth. The choice is yours. You can fold your hand, you can remain afraid, or you can empower your life and start, overcoming your fears and find the peace and happiness you deserve. So courage, okay? Like I said, you pick something you're afraid of doing, but would not do physical harm to you if you did it. In other words, you're not going to break your leg, you're not going to die, and so forth. Such as public speaking. Public speaking is a big fear. 70% of the people are terrified of public speaking. If you're single, approaching someone of the opposite sex and starting conversation. Fear of learning something new, maybe something you've never tried before, or maybe trying to break a habit. You've got one of those addictive behaviors you do that you are using to run away from things. Okay. So you make a decision that you're going to make a fool of yourself, and you're going to do this thing even though it's scary. You're going to step out. You're going to do this, and you take your deep breath, and you do the 1, 2, 3 count, and you take action. Even though you're feeling anxiety and fear, you take action. And if you've got someone who can be your cheerleader, which is most people don't, because most people are surrounded by other people who are afraid and are going to prevent them from trying new things, you take the action. Now remember, you do this in small steps. You tackle small things first, and then you can start small fears first, then start tackling bigger fears. But again, you work it through in your mind, and then you choose the action and you take the action. And if you find yourself, like I say, doing addictive, compulsive things that are running away from life, then you have a lot of fears, and you need to start tackling those fears. Or if you have a lot of anxiety, I mean, like I say, addictions and so forth are rooted in anxiety and trying to run away from the anxiety. It means that there are things in your life that you're avoiding, you're not tackling. Instead of dealing with the problems of life and making a plan and going after it, okay, you're trying to run away. And you're trying to dodge. You're trying to bury your head in sand and pretend it will go away. It will never go away. The only way to make it go away is to confront it. And that's really, a large part of what we're trying to do in emotional healing is we're taking things that are inside of people that they've been running away from themselves for years and years and years. Painful experiences and so forth they've had. And we're turning them around, and we're getting them to look at that and get angry, cry, do whatever they need to do, but do something that takes action to confront that. And that's really a lot what I do in emotional healing is I basically am just a cheerleader for people to basically help them go through this process. So small dark spaces. So if someone just said, okay, they're afraid of small dark spaces. What I'm saying is, if you're afraid of small dark spaces, this is what I do. I would deliberately go into a small dark space and make myself sit there. because I don't want my life to be controlled by fear. A small dark space is not going to hurt me. The reason why you're afraid of it, it's reminding you of something that you don't want to deal with. So confronting it head on is going to help confront what you want to deal with. I don't think it's the chemicals released in the brain in response to fear that results in the addiction. What results in the addiction is the addiction happens because you have an unresolved trauma. Remember we talked last time about trauma vortexes. So when your trauma starts coming up, when the anxiety starts coming up, because there are triggers, there are the buttons, the things that remind you of the unresolved trauma, then you try to escape it. You try to run away from it. All addictions are numbing in some ways. They're numbing to life. They're going into something that makes you not very aware, whether it's smoking, alcohol, even eating too much, especially eating a lot of sugar, and that kind of stuff, all numbs your body, numbs your brain. It's an effort. It's not an effort to seek pleasure. It's an effort to avoid pain. It's an effort to run away from yourself. And so what you're trying to do is escape the chemicals in your brain by trying to do something else. And the only real solution is to tackle what's scaring you. It's You've got to do that. I'd rather walk up to Angel's Landing blindfolded and backwards than get into the small dark space. Well, what I'm saying is you don't have to. No, nobody has to face anything they don't want to face. I'm just saying that when I find that there is a fear and I look at it and I go, well, this is not a rational fear. There's really nothing there. Now, I have a healthy fear of rattlesnakes, and I have healthy fear of black widow spiders, and I have healthy fear of heights, and I have healthy fear of a lot of things, okay? Because when I was climbing Angel's Landing, I was very careful. I was very careful. You're a step or two away from falling 1,000 feet straight down and dying. There are black widow spiders in the yard. When I'm going into a pile of wood or whatever, I put on gloves. I don't want to get bitten by a black widow spider. In other words, there's a certain level of fear that motivates you to take reasonable precautions to keep yourself safe. But it doesn't paralyze you so you can't take action. When a fear paralyzes you, so it prevents you from being able to do something, and other people are perfectly capable of doing that, that's an irrational programmed fear related to your unresolved trauma vortexes. And our whole idea in emotional healing is we want to help people go back and we want to help people get rid of their buttons, get rid of their triggers, so that they're not running away from things that don't need to be run away from. I would definitely run away from certain things that are dangerous, but I'm not going to run away from a mouse, all right, or a grasshopper, or a garden snake, or anything like that, because they're not dangerous. They're not going to hurt me. And I have if I can get my brain to work through those traumas so that I can deal with things that are not actually harmful, then I am not letting fear run my life. I had a listening to this guy on YouTube, Bobby Collier. He says, fear is actually faith. It's faith in the devil. It's faith that bad things are going to happen. In other words, you get to choose whether you're going to have faith in good things or whether you're going to have faith in bad things. What someone is saying, they have a nighttime disorder. They go to sleep for about an hour, wake up, eat something, and then have to go back to sleep. If they don't, they lie awake, sleep for hours. Well, first of all, I wouldn't consider that to be a dangerous thing, although the question is that if we were doing emotional healing on that, we'd try to go back and age regress that, or figure out when that started, why it started, and what triggered it. I mean, that's what we do in emotional healing, is we go back and try to figure out what triggered this and what's the unresolved trauma that needs to be triggered, needs to be dealt with. I was just thinking, I don't have pictures of this. I wish I had pictures of this, but I went to a men's group for quite some time, and for the final thing of this men's group, the guy who was leading the men's group was a rock climber. He was not only a rock climber, he was an experienced rock climber and rock climbing instructor. So he took us all to go rappelling off the edge of a cliff. And I've always thought rappelling looked really interesting. And so I watched some of the other guys come down the cliff, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this. Now, I'm not very athletic. All right. I've never been very athletic. I'm not like that. Even when I was more physically fit than I am now, I've never been actually really that strong either. But I got up to the top of the cliff, and you get strapped in, And I have total confidence. I'm telling myself, okay, the ropes hold. You're not going to fall. You're, you're going to be okay. There are people spotting you, blah, blah, blah. This guy's done this before. Other people have done this ahead of you. But you have to basically back up till you're at the edge of the cliff, standing with the cliff behind you. And then you have to step off the cliff and push your foot against the cliff and back off so that you basically are then have your feet, against the side of the cliff and then walk down the cliff, right? So I take my step backwards and I try to put my foot on the edge of the cliff and I slip and I start to fall back. Well, the guy pulled me so I wouldn't fall back and hit my head on the rock, but he pulled me really hard and my heels were caught on the edge of the cliff. So here's my feet like this on the side of the cliff with my, imagine this is my foot and that's my heel. And there I am with my feet and I'm jackknifed against the side of the cliff. Literally my body is pulled up next to my legs. So I'm like this. Here's my head on this side. Here's my feet on this side. And this is the cliff. All right. So I'm looking up at him and I know I'm not going to fall. The ropes are holding me. All right. And I'm just sitting here thinking, how am I going to get out of this? And he tried to pull me up, but he couldn't get enough leverage to pull me back up on the cliff. And so he's sitting there and I just said, okay, stop for a second. So I pulled in my thing. What's the solution? How do I do this? Whatever. And the thought came to me, you need some slack because right now he's got you so jammed up tight that there's no way you're going to be able to get your feet up against that cliff. You need to get him to let the rope out a little bit. And so if I said, listen, you need to let the rope go a little bit. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah. And so he basically, that's something I don't know. Why is my phone starting up? Somehow my Siri just started up on my phone. I must have said something with Siri. How interesting. Okay. So when he let me a little bit loose, I was able to push, get my feet down where I could push myself out, and I managed to go down. My lesson is that I needed to lift weights or something, work out, because it was really hard. But the fact is I survived it. All right. I've done a lot of things like this. Okay. Because I just don't want to have to live my life in fear. I think if we're living our life in fear, and I want to actually bring this into a more spiritual perspective. I've met a lot of people who are, believers in God. I mean, they believe in God. They believe, but they're so living in fear. They're afraid of that somehow if they hear the wrong idea or the wrong thing, that somehow they're going to be tainted and Satan's going to lead them astray and blah, 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 blah. And I remember reading in Napoleon Hill's Dialogue with the Devil, which is an interesting book. Napoleon Hill was actually afraid to publish it while he was alive. So it was published after his death. But in it, whether he does this didactically or how it is, he confronts the devil and asks him to, reveal his secrets, how he controls mankind. And one of the things that the devil says is he doesn't mind religion as long as people teach or taught to fear him, because that's what gives him power. Now, I have reasonable caution. I want to do the right thing. I don't want to do things that are stupid and foolish and wrong and evil. But to live my life in fear of that, in fear, like my mom, that if I make a mistake, there's no forgiveness, there's no second chance, there's no loving, forgiving God, and to be totally paralyzed if I actually maybe believe the wrong thing, that God's going to send me to hell or something like that. That's just totally irrational to me. Okay, I want to live in the love and faith of God, not in the fear and negativity. And that goes back to that experience that I talked about years ago with Jesus, where he said, the tools of darkness are shame, fear, guilt, and blame. In other words, God doesn't work by blaming us, by making us afraid, by doing these things. The light, the tools of light are faith, hope, love, forgiveness, that lift us out of that into a different place. And like I said, it's not that fear is bad, but when you let fear run your life, you're really putting faith in the wrong thing. You're putting faith in evil, not faith in good. And so I want to focus on the good. I want to focus on believing that God can help me overcome anything, that God can help me go through anything, that God can help me deal with anything. I don't want to get stuck in worry and fear and anxiety and those sorts of things. I want to believe that whatever is happening, that there is a loving Father in heaven who, if I turn to him and I like basically, I think God inspired me what to do when I was jackknifed against the side of the cliff, because I stayed calm and I basically quieted myself inside, went inside and said, what do I do? And the little idea popped in my head of what to do. And I think that God can do that for you in any circumstance. If you can calm your brain down and say, how do I solve this? What do I do? And then you have to have the courage, because it took courage to get him to let me down farther, right? Down farther in the side of the cliff, right? Instead of trying to pull me up, let me down. But it was the right thing to do, because I was able to get my legs in front of me. It was scary, but I did it because I knew it was the right solution. And that's what courage does for you. Courage, again, is the antidote to fear. And courage is the ability to think through things, find some reasonable course of action or solution to face the things that are bothering you, and then just have the courage to act on it. That's pretty much kind of the end of it. No, I don't see any other comments or questions from everybody. Hi, all the people who said hi. Thanks for continuing to be with us. We're going to take a 2-week break. The next one of these will be in 14 days, I think, on the 25th, because I'm taking a little bit of, let me just double check on that, but I'm just taking a little bit of time to really work on things. Yeah, so on the 25th will be our last session of the tools for healing. And then in July, we'll be starting the next module. And the next module, I'm going to actually talk, I kind of goofed up, because the title for this really should have been, understanding emotions or something, because the tools for healing is all the techniques I use for help me overcome this. Flower essences, essential oils, question affirmation technique, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've got to come up with a new name for the third module, but that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about using flower essences. We're going to be talking about aromatherapy. We're going to talk about tools I use, like the question affirmation technique, and other things I do to actually help people heal emotionally. So what we've done just so far, just kind of to wrap up where we've been, in the first module, I laid out the spiritual foundations, the spiritual principles on which this is based. In this module, I've been laying out the negative emotions and their positive purposes, and the basic, what they're encouraging us to do. And I'm going to end with this last lesson on awareness, which is just the basic thing of instead of running away from something, turning and focusing your attention on it. And and confronting it and how that aids in the healing process. And then the third module, we'll talk about all the tools we use. And in the last module, we'll talk about the emotional anatomy, the map I use for emotional healing. So appreciate all of you who have joined us. I don't see any other further questions. I hope everything was clear. Does anybody have any comments before I go? Would they like to type in? Are you enjoying the course? If you need help with something specific, you'd always contact me and schedule an appointment, and we could actually see if we can work through it. Because to try to come up with an answer to somebody's specific issue, usually I need to kind of ask a few questions and try to come up with whatever is needed. But okay, well, that's it for tonight. So everybody, have a wonderful evening, and I'll catch you again in 2 weeks. Oh, and thanks for the positive comments too, everybody.